Well, here we are again. It's that time, everybody, when we get to see Karen De La Carriere. Hi, Karen.
My dearest John.
You're looking very elegant today, I must say.
Oh, John,
in your
thank
new
you.
studio.
Different lighting, different microphone. Yeah.
Good. And without Hawaii kind of fading in and out behind you. Oh, dear.
Yeah. Hawaii days are gone. This is an upgrade. Yeah.
Definitely. So we're going to talk about the perverse, bizarre sexual antics of the Scientology cult, and their attitude towards sexual privacy and sexual relations in marriage. And when we were talking before, I think you put it very well when you said that it's not usual, if you're a member of a religion, for the church to be the third person in the bed with you. And so we're talking about the case of a woman who called Ramana Browning, or Dines Browning. I'm not sure which way around that would be. And she, as a teenager, with her mother's consent, joined the Sea Organization and ended up on the Free Winds ship, which sails out of the Dutch Antilles, and where the highest level of Scientology is to be found, the Operating Thetan Level 8 course, where you find out that Ron Hubbard actually created the universe and we should worship him, pretty much, as far as I understand it. And that Scientology, I think my understanding of these materials is that you're told that you didn't need to do any of the rest of it and you now got to undo it all. Something like that. It used to be said, when Hubbard first talked about this course back in the early 1970s, he said that it would lead you to being at cause over mental and physical matter, energy, space, and time. So you'd not only have control of your own mind, you'd have control over the physical universe. So, if you felt like going out of your body one night and blowing up a planet somewhere, you'd be able to do that. It doesn't seem to have worked very well for the few hundreds of people who've done it so far, because I still exist and you still exist. So if they could blow anything up, I'm sure it'd be us. But we talked before about this kind of weekly ritual that happens at headquarters, the secret headquarters at Gilman Hot Springs, where somebody will be picked on for their sexual practices, put on the stage and humiliated in front of the crew for the pleasure of David Miscavige, the chairman of the board. Tell us a little bit about this case, because you've met Ramana, yeah?
Yes. She visited with me all the way from Australia. Before I get into Ramana, I want to comment on the fact that Scientology is obsessively interested in your sex life.
Yeah, and how?
Obscenely. If you just walked in and they're trying to get you to join staff, look at this. I sent this. Look at this. They want to know every sexual activity you've ever had. You're supposed to write up time, place, form, and event. Who did you have sex with? How long did it last? What position were you in? What toys did you use? What fantasy did you have in your head? Did you have an orgasm? How long was the orgasm?
How much semen did you ejaculate?
It is beyond belief. There are religions that seem to be a little off. Like the holy rollers talking in tongues, like you get the, rolling on the floor. You get
snake handling.
Snake handling. And they seem a bit off, but they don't try and zero in to finding out whether you masturbated last night or not, and then beating up on you to find out, well, when did you masturbate? This is beyond obsession. It is it's obscene, really. And Ramana poor girl in the Sea Org at what, 15, 16 years old. She did go to the Daily Mail. I helped with that and told her whole story. So before any audience think, oh God, John and Karen are talking about some private stuff. No, Ramana wanted the world to know all about this.
Yes, we have not seen her
She told the Daily Mail.
We've not seen her pre-clear folders, and we won't be releasing her ethics files or anything like that. This is because she wants the world to know. And she's not the only person who's been treated this way. This has become a commonplace. I wanted to say that often what happens in a cult group is that the imbalance of the leader is found within the teachings. And so you have somebody like, say, the man who called himself the Supreme Being, Bhagwan, Sri Rajneesh, more recently known as Osho the Buddha. And he formed a group in Pune, India, where people would be locked in a dark room, a mass of people, and ordered to beat each other, or ordered to have sex as a kind of writhing mob of people. And this, I think, speaks to his inadequacy. Perhaps physically, he was a slight man. He was not a particularly masculine or built man, and to something in him. Now, with Ron Hubbard, there's definitely the idea that he had a certain degree of sadism. You know, the story about him getting Charlie Reesdorf and somebody else whose name I don't remember to push a peanut with their noses around the deck of the Apollo ship. This, while the crew watched, this kind of humiliation. But David Miscavige has stepped this up significantly. That there seems to be, you know, the psychopathology of David Miscavige, who I think could have had a career as if his lovely father, Ron Miscavige, had not taken him to East Grinstead. I think David Miscavige could have been a street tough gang leader in Philadelphia, and I think he would have been very suited to that as a profession. Instead of which, he's the head of a multi-billion-dollar group which has achieved religious status around the world, and is getting people to basically open the bedroom door and, you know, putting them in a position of weakness. Because, of course, we don't know anything about his sex life. We don't even know if he has a sex life. We're told that he has a communicator who works closely with him. But his wife, Shelley, has been missing for quite some time. Whether by her choice or not, we do not know. And so there's presumably something sexually strange about David Miscavige. So let's look at what Ramana was asked to do. She was, as a teenager, she was married off to a wealthy Scientologist. And
just an older Sea Org member.
Just an older Sea Org member.
Slayer.
Oh dear.
On Free Winds,
yes.
Once you're Sea Org, you can't be married off to anyone who is not Sea Org.
Of course
In
not.
fact,
Of course
you can't
not.
even date anyone. You can't have affection or love for anyone who is.
You can't hold hands with anyone without permission. I've seen an order that was issued at St. Hill in East Grinstead, where a woman was put in an empty cesspit, an underground cesspit, because she'd been, and I think she stayed 3 days and nights in there, because she'd been seen holding hands with another young woman, which therefore qualified her as a lesbian, apparently. You know, friendship is not something that's recognized really in Scientology, let's face it. So she's married off to somebody older, and then there's a complaint that he's had to masturbate because she is not pleasuring him.
Well, it came up in his sec check, in his thing, that
his security check, which you should perhaps explain.
Check for masturbation, yes.
Yeah, masturbation, should perhaps explain that in Scientology, but for those who've not had the misfortune to be involved with it, that there is a machine called the electropsychometer, which is a Wheatstone bridge to anybody who's, and Jeffrey and I have done some progress, some shows about how this thing works. Hubbard, they get very offended when you call it a lie detector, but I know of at least 2 places where Hubbard called it a lie detector. And so you're attached to this lie detector with electrodes, and then an enormous list of questions, sometimes hundreds, literally hundreds of questions is asked of you. And this is called a confessional. It's called integrity processing. But when it was first released in the late 1950s, it was called security checking. And it's a way of seeing if you're of any potential danger to Scientology. And one of the people who developed Scientology a bit further, Keith Ranieri of NXIVM, who is now in prison for the things he did, and quite evidently stole ideas from Scientology. One of the things he added to the mix was the idea of collateral, that if you wanted to be in the inner group at NXIVM, you had to do things that were self-damaging. You had to make confessions, even if they were not true, which could later be used against you. And I imagine that, if Miscavige is watching this, and I do hope he is, that he'll probably be adding that in as well, that you'll film people. Oh, they do film people giving confessions. So they are collecting this material, and we wonder, what the purpose of this is, whether it is just for David Miscavige's deviant pleasure, or whether this is material. I've certainly met a number of people over the years who've had terrible information about Scientology, but were unwilling to go public because Scientology knew all about their sex life. And a few times I've been told by people, well, I would tell my story, but I don't want my children to read what's in my counseling folders, or to hear what's in my counseling folders. So people, it's a very effective way of silencing people.
Yeah.
Didn't shut me up, but then nothing does. What can we say?
Yeah. Yes. This is a blackmail. Now, the security questions, instead of giving you gain, all auditing is supposed to better you, are very often intelligence questions.
Yes.
To see how Scientology's OSA, Office of Special Affairs, the dirty tricks, black bag job operations of the cult, can store that to then threaten you or hint, give veiled threats. If you're going to go do this, we've got this ammunition. It's just, now, here's the thing. Scientology stores this data and cross-indexes it. They've got very advanced computer systems storing up every word you've ever said. When they publish a hate page on you, it is so embellished and so altered and so magnified as to be almost unrecognizable of what you actually did say. The hate pages are just lies. What they say about Mike Rinder is just unbelievable, Antonio Tate. So,
and indeed what they've said about me over the years, they actually they published a little book about me, which was pushed through all the doors in East Grinstead where I was living at the time. And as you say, I didn't recognize who it was about. Really.
They called Bonnie Woods a terrorist. And
yeah,
they're trying to terrorist, So people now know, and the media laugh at their hate pages. I won't even tell you how much those hate pages are a badge of honor for media to know you're good. You're not, you're out and you're speaking up. Okay.
Could I just interject something about Bonnie Woods? So they sued Bonnie Woods for handing out a leaflet that I admit to having written, because they were trying to recruit in East Grinstead, and I had this idea, well, go up to the recruiter, give them the leaflet and say, I'm going to spend the day with you, and everybody you talk to, I'm going to give this leaflet. And it starts 75 million years ago in this sector of the galaxy, the evil Prince Xenu rounded up. So, so the body router, as they call their recruiters, would go back into the shop and say, what's this? And be told, oh, that's complete nonsense. But we closed 2 of their places down in a matter of weeks using this technique. And I'm amazed that it's not been picked up elsewhere. Because anybody that's seen the so-called OT3 material about Xenu and the body thetans now has to have a class 8 auditor. So it means if they're in the Sea organization, they've got no chance of having their heads messed up with Scientology auditing. But they sued her, and it was.
I want to tell that. Please, when we finish with Ramana, in order to uplift the audience, because Ramana's story is dark, let's uplift it with the incredible win and all your help to Bonnie and how she
that's given us a
I don't want it in 1 or 2 seconds. I want to tell the story.
And it gives us the mystery, so that now everybody watching this is going, what are they going to say about Bonnie Woods? So that's good. That's good. You have to stay till the end.
So one thing I want to go off in a little tributary off the main river before we start fully on Ramana is the language and the culture is incredibly vulgar. And if you can't stand to hear vulgar language, fast wind it for the next minute or 2, because I'm going to be a little bit explicit here.
I'll just put my fingers in my ears.
Yes, put your fingers in your ears. Let the next 2 minutes, skip it. Don't even listen to it. There are 2 very, very high executives in Scientology. The executive director international, Guillaume Lerserre, French guy, and Mark Yeager, commanding officer of CMO. But he used to be, when the RTC had inspector generals, he was inspector general admin. He's always been way up there. He was forced to live in a tent in the wilderness for 2 years while David Miscavige routinely visited him and kicked him in the chest. Anyway, this is what David Miscavige said to these. You can barely get higher. These 2 executives reported to little else but him. And he said, the only expansion Mark Yeager knows is his cock in the butt, in the anus of Guillaume Lerserre. Now, he ran this homosexuality, taunting them. These guys were heterosexual. They weren't even, but his hatred of homosexuals.
The homophobia in Scientology.
Homophobia. No. Yes, it is. It is. It has been for years.
Starting with Hubbard.
They want gay money, though. They don't want to lose out if you're gay to not get your cash. But they try to audit or counsel the gay out of you.
Because Ron Hubbard said that all homosexuals are covertly hostile, that they all have unexpressed resentment to everybody around them. And that's an aspect of the scripture of Scientology, the inviolable scripture of Scientology. So, I mean, Paul Haggis, the reason he left was because one of his daughters is gay, and he eventually would not accept, what was being said behind the scenes about gay people, even though, of course, one of their most famous adherents, John Travolta, is a gay man.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Well, here's the thing. Every time Miscavige wanted to control Mike Rinder further, his book, he clearly mentions this, he would send him vile instant messages by text saying, you suck cock on Hollywood Boulevard. This was the way he got it over and over and over. This is a guy who wants to be recognized as the Pope of Scientology. But his foul language would just, and again, look at the sexuality in all of this. We're looking at how Scientology views sex. It uses it with hate. If you get pregnant in Scientology, you are coerced to abort. No babies.
If you're in the Sea organization, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, right.
And that's something that started with Miscavige. That's not an aspect of Hubbard's version of Scientology. And of course, the rule keeping Scientology working is that nothing that Hubbard said may be changed, but Miscavige has actually changed quite a lot. And one of these things is that people who are in the SEAL were allowed to have children. And Miscavige realized that it was costing too much money. And because they neglected the children, and there are many stories of awful neglect, the ranch down in Mexico that they ran, which had scorpions in it, over here in England, there was a situation where 80 children were being looked after by one adult, and a little 8-year-old boy drowned. And Miscavige went, well, what's the advantage of them having children? They can't come and work for me till they're 12 years old. So he brought in this new rule. And yet this is meant to be part of the survival of the family. This is meant to be an essential aspect of Scientology, the second dynamic, survival through the family. And here he is ordering abortions. A friend of mine was on the rehabilitation project force, the Gulag, the labor camp, and she fell pregnant. And she told me that they'd spent 2 weeks screaming at her to get an abortion. And when she refused, she and another woman who'd also refused were ordered to shovel human excrement from one pit into another.
Yes.
And, a pregnant woman, what is more sacred to humanity than a pregnant woman? We have to look after pregnant women. So, you're not even allowed to eat unpasteurized cheese. So the idea of shoveling human excrement, being exposed that closely to risk is truly horrifying. It's somewhat of a contradiction to the promises of the founder of Scientology, one way or another.
Just to correct this, on the Apollo, pregnant women were could and Hubbard endorsed abortion. However,
there we go.
You did have power of choice. If you didn't want to abort, you would be sent off to a land base, a class 4 or class 5 org. So you could abort, which was encouraged, but it wasn't mandated where you were penalized and going to the chain locker or something for not. You were told, and the way they justified it is if the baby presented itself breech and you needed anesthesia and a C-section, there was no OBGYN on the ship, so it made sense logically to anyone, since it didn't have high tech to deliver babies, that you either abort, or if you really wanted to start a family and not be with Hubbard on the ship, you went to an org. Okay.
Yeah, but that's really important, I think, and thank you for putting that in. And it opens another door, and this is probably the time to talk about it. Ron Hubbard was obsessed with abortion.
Yes.
Reading Dianetics, The Mental Science of Modern Health. I've done it again. He mentions attempted abortions tens of times, and you get this idea that he believes that most women seek to abort fetuses, that this is normal. In going through his Navy and Veterans Administration files, and the Navy files about 800 pages, Veterans about 300 or 400 in the Veterans Administration, there is a strange little entry where he's talking about his first wife, Polly, Margaret Louise Grubb, by whom he had 2 children, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., I think born in 1934, and Catherine, born in 1936. And he makes this note, and this is while he's in the Navy in the 1940s, and by this time he's abandoned his wife and his children. He pays no child support for them at all after 1941. But there's this strange little note about his wife having had, I think it's 9 spontaneous abortions. Now, it doesn't say miscarriages. It says spontaneous abortions. Now, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., Nibs, his oldest son, said that he, as a small boy, had walked in on his father with a clothes hanger seeking to perform an abortion on his mother. Now, we treat everything that L. Ron Hubbard Jr. said with a pinch of salt. But I think there may be some truth because we find this obsessive idea. And I'm really interested to find that. So you might be sent to St. Hill, or you might be sent to the Advanced Organization in Los Angeles, but you couldn't be on the ship because, L. Ron Hubbard had worked out that it was not, how are you going to have babies on board that ship anyway? I mean, the deplorable conditions. You mentioned Mike Grinder's excellent book, A Billion Years, and his description when I first interviewed him, which seems like a very long time ago, a year or two back, I was, and I've spent 40 years studying this thing since I left it, and I've interviewed hundreds of people over that time, but he still shocked me with his description of the men's dorm aboard the Apollo, and the stinking,
Smell.
fetid,
Ooh. It was, if you went by near in an outer corridor, the odors. Yeah.
So okay. We're dealing with
well, let me just, since we're off in little tributaries, people probably know my story. I had a son born in the cult. He was raised in the cult, and he'd say, Mom, they do have some good. I realize the bad, because when he would go off to pick up checks, he was trusted and sent to go get a nice fat check, go on a plane, get a check. People would come up to him and say, your father is in SB hole. Your father is being beaten up and stuff.
And his father was Heber Jentsch, who was the president of the Church of Scientology. The hole is an internal prison, which at peak, again, Mike Grinder describes it. He says it's a double trailer, and there were 140 people, he says, crowded into it by the time he left. So the whole top echelon of Scientology was actually functioning from this one huge room where they had no showers. I think they had a couple of toilets, and that's it. And they were demeaned and humiliated as part of the David Miscavige ritual.
Seances, literally seances. Beating up each other, asking each other to cough up crimes. Anyway, Alexander died at 27 years old because of the malicious conduct of the cult, who had cut him off from me and because he was cut off from me, he didn't get proper diagnosis for his walking pneumonia, and he was taking opioids rather than antibiotics, and he died. But the cult has blood on its hands, and anytime I get a chance to say that, I will, because their malicious disconnection policy by consequences caused Alexander's death.
Yes. And the deaths of many other people. I mean, I traced 38 cases of suspicious death. I talked with a journalist who was investigating the Lisa McFerrin case, and she had won a Pulitzer Prize for work that wasn't to do with Scientology. And she told me that she'd found 8 other cases of suspicious death in Clearwater. There's one. The one I remember was an elderly man who had got into a scalding hot bath, and the shock had caused him to have a heart attack and die. And these things are covered up so efficiently. Let's Tell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, I tell the story of Susan Meister, who was shot dead aboard the flagship. And I will never forget, I phoned her father up in the States. And, this is about a dozen years after it had happened, something like that. So it's a while. And he said, if you turn out to be one of them, I can have your legs broken. I thought, well, that's quite a severe reaction. I've not had that threatened before. But this man had been harassed so much, so severely. So in her case, it was said that she'd shot herself. He was a weapons expert, and the gun involved, he said you couldn't shoot yourself with it. The barrel was too long. I was unfortunately unable to find out really any more about it. But he went all the way to Morocco to see her body and was not allowed to see her body because, under Hubbard's direction, no doubt, port authorities had been told that she had, I think it was typhoid. And so she had to be in a sealed lead coffin. And her father was never able to see the body. Hubbard refused to talk to him. And then the Guardian's office, bless them, started harassing him to silence him, to shut him up. So, by the time I came to him those years later, I'm happy to say that he told me the whole story from his perspective. And I had enough documentary evidence to see that this poor young woman had had some kind of manic episode. And, what led to her death, we still don't really know. But I think what I do know is if she hadn't been aboard that ship, she'd probably have lived. It was, the proximity to Hubbard and the terrible environment there.
I dearly wish you would do an interview with Janice Grady. Janice will give you the other side of the story of Susan Meister, plus other Apollo facts.
I'm happy to talk with her. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you should do a video. You really get some. Janice pulled no punches in her books on Hubbard's maniacal temper tantrums, which would shake the entire thing. Anyway, So my son died, but before he died, his wife Andrea got pregnant, and she was coerced to abort. She worked at Celebrity Center down the road in Hollywood, and she was just forced to abort. I think the manner was you took a pill the morning after or whatever. I don't know. But she just caved in after that.
Of course.
Because she had such a strong desire to be a mom. She wanted to be a mom. And so...
Yeah, I mean, unlike Hubbard, most human beings want to be parents. They want to have children. Hubbard neglected or abandoned one way or another all of his children and destroyed their lives for the most part.
Yeah. So that she did get pregnant once more, but it was a spontaneous abortion. So because the whole bloodline is cut down, Alexander's dead. I will never be a grandma. I will never have the joy of having grandchildren. They killed the potential child and baby that could be born. They're baby killers. I'm just going to state it flat out. This coerced abortion has been for so long. And again, I want to quickly put in a stipulation here. We're not talking about pro-choice or pro-life. This is not that kind of argument. We're talking about forced, coerced, no power of choice. You have to. This is not anything to do with whatever your posture is in terms of thing. That's not the discussion at all. Please don't think this is,
it's not the choice of the woman involved. It's something that's forced upon them. And it's one of the worst
by management.
It's one of the worst things you can do to a human being in terms of torture. Making somebody go through that, having known a number of women who've had terminations that they chose to have, and of later, it's not something they feel happy about. I mean, of course, I am pro-choice. That's absolutely my position, but it's not a choice I've ever had to make, and it's not a choice I would make. I'm very happy that I do have 4 children, 2 grandchildren now. And I'll have to share them with you so you can have some too. But in fact, my granddaughter Freya was born in December, so and she's beautiful.
Actually, you showed me. Yeah, she's just beautiful.
So anybody that wants to, I just came away from watching a documentary about Andrew Tate, this dreadful cage fighter who has the greatest following on social media of anybody in the world. And he's been arrested in Romania for human trafficking.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
but he's
yeah.
seeing that attitude, that misogynistic, hateful attitude that says
Yeah.
that women should be slaves and that, men should order them what to do. This obtains in Scientology, but of course, the master is David Miscavige, that everybody has to do what he orders them to do. This has gone so far away from the thing that you and I believed in, that we thought was going to help humanity. We were going to clear the planet. We were going to overcome insanity, war, and crime by our ethical behavior. And look at it. It's an insane criminal community that is at war with the rest of the world.
Yes. Look at the hypocrisy, the absolute opposite of what they say they stand for. In the creed of Scientology, it says man has an inalienable right, that which cannot be taken away, inalienable right to the creation of his own kind. That's what they put in the creed. Oh, it looks good. It looks so ecclesiastical. You have the right. You're a human being. Governments and so on can't take away they can't. Remember, China used to have the one-child rule and stuff, but
it still has a two-child rule in case anybody's getting two. They still enforce sterilization upon women in China.
Right. But look how, and then Scientology comes along and says, in the 50s, the creed, man has an inalienable right. Bollocks, as they say in England. Bollocks, codswallop. Nonsense. Yeah. You have no inalienable right at all. They
have no rights.
They have the right to force you to kill the fetus. That's Scientology. And now, because of internet uproar and videos like this, they still do it, but they do it gently and covertly. They don't make you shove excrement as a punishment. Andrea, when she got pregnant, had to work standing on her feet 12 hours a day, cleaning dishes and galley work. Not cleaning dishes sounds mild, but mopping greasy, just 12 hours a day when she was pregnant, as a punishment for allowing herself. You're considered an ethical. Your ethics is out. Claire Headley, the wife of Mark Headley, told me how she was sent to OGH, Old Gilman House, at the west end of the property. It was this like haunted, grotesque building. They've torn it down. There were so many stories of Old Gilman House and imprisonment and cameras are on you, and that they actually vanished. It no longer exists. I was sent to Old Gilman House at one point. OGH. That's the and it was spooky and it was ghostly. It just was how many haunted souls lived in that. Anyway, you were sent to OGH because you got pregnant. And then you had to do heavy manual labor. So never mind the fluff and froth that Scientology puts up on their sites of how family oriented they are. And the creed looks so good. Your inalienable right. Rubbish. You have no right at all to have a child. The way they do it now is more gentle.
Well, it's not getting caught, is it? I talked with a lovely woman who spent 21 years in Avatar, which is an offshoot of Scientology, started by a guy called Harry Palmer, who was the Elmira, New York mission holder. And he splintered and had an independent group. And then he decided that he could make money another way. And what happened along the way, and I was on the periphery of this because I was in California in '86 when he was doing what he was doing. And some of his staff went to the local news and said, he's a terrible man. And I was told that they were immediately by him threatened that their ethics dossiers would be made public. Now, Scientology would not make that threat. They'll reveal the contents of your ethics dossier, but there's so much that's about public relations. And one of the things I realized about Hubbard a long time ago is he promised us everything we wanted. You know, you're godlike, you've got superpowers. Just tell people what they want to hear. The standard snake oil selling technique. And the reality will be, you know, one of his favorite books and one of mine, Alice Through the Looking Glass. Everything is the opposite of what you're presented with. Scientology is not liberating the planet, it's enslaving the planet. It's finding ways of, and it's the most insidious, you know, in talking with Conway and Siegelman, they wrote a book called Snapping, which was first published in the late 70s after Jonestown. And then they made a revised edition in 1990, and they said that Scientology has the most debilitating set of rituals of any cult in America at that time. And they reckon that to get over the experience of being in the Moonies or the Krishnas would take you 3 to 6 months. But with Scientology, they said, well, 12 and a half years. And I was in touch with them through Tony Ortega because I said something, I made a mistake. I'd said something wrong about them. And Tony published it and then got hold of them because he likes the news aspect of things, I suppose. So he embarrassed and humiliated me publicly. But that's all right. He's a good friend and he's done an amazing job. But it was good because it put me in touch with them. And I said, when you said 12 and a half years, that was guess, wasn't it? Because I've come to the conclusion that unaided, most people do not recover from Scientology because it is so much more invasive than anything else. If you do transcendental meditation, yes, you'll listen to hundreds of hours of boring talks and, you know, the same kind of thing that all groups hand out, but you'll only do 2 techniques. You'll do the chanting the name of a demon or deity, the transcendental meditation, and you're not meant to know it's a demon or deity that you're invoking while you're doing it. So that's a bit of a secret. Sorry, I've let that out. Or you do the hopping, you know, the flying bit. You know, I interviewed a woman who'd fractured her coccyx doing this. I'd interviewed a man who had tunnel vision after years of meditation in transcendental meditation. But you've only got 2 techniques. In Scientology, you've got 2,000. And then you get to the language, you know, in transcendental meditation or the Rajneeshis, you'll learn a few Sanskrit words, you know, which is all fine. You'll learn how to do a puja, a little ceremony, what have you. Scientology, 2 600-page dictionaries of this loaded language, and your internal reality is distorted so that the way you see the world changes. I was talking with Mike Rinder earlier today, and he said that we were talking about how he'd kind of decompressed from Scientology. And then he was saying that one of the first and important milestones was realizing that the outside world, what Hubbard called the WOG world, and that's a word that where I live is like the N word. So you have to be a little bit
slur.
It means somebody who's not white. You know, that's what it means in British English. And Hubbard picked the word up quite delightedly because he was a terrible racist. And it then becomes that all non-Scientologists are wogs, raw meat, dead in the head wogs. And Mike was saying that realizing that actually there were, you know, kind, considerate, decent people in the outside world. And it shows how far the internal reality can be twisted so that you're, you know, I talked with a woman who was 20 years inside, and she'd gone on a leave of absence because her mum was having surgery. And she told me about walking around the supermarket and feeling really sorry for all of the wogs because they don't have the spiritual freedom. This is a woman who said that she usually got 2 hours sleep a night. 5 hours was really good. And she's eating rubbish and she's being shouted at. And she is pitying the people walking around the supermarket who actually have so much more liberty than anybody who is in, you know, Scientology. So that changing the way you see the world, which is such an important aspect of mind control, so that you start agreeing with it. I mean, Lawrence Wright, in Going Clear, said that he couldn't understand why it was that when the Los Angeles raids happened, the largest raids in the history of the FBI in July 1977 in Washington, D.C. and LA, the Rehabilitation Project Force, the people who were like imprisoned in Scientology, just waited to see what would happen. They didn't run away, and he didn't understand this, which said, you have to understand the mentality. We have ways here of making slaves, as L. Ron Hubbard said. I think he elsewhere said willing slaves. And that's the horror of this, that, you know, with human trafficking, which is a commonplace in Scientology, unless somebody says, I've been trafficked, and even when they do, I think the Headleys did try and bring a case based on that, then, you know, if you are under the influence of somebody else, you won't protest about them. So, you know, a spouse who is being beaten won't complain to the police because the internal reality has been shifted so that they think that their spouse loves them really, but they have this terrible temper or, you know, what have you. And things are justified. That things
Justifications.
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 There's a rationalization of everything that happens.
Larry Wright even covered how it was just amazing to him in the story of musical chairs, where this bizarre incident in the middle of the night, David Miscavige had chairs and everyone had to grab a chair when the music stopped.
He's an overgrown child, isn't he? Let's face it. You know.
Well, no, I hate that word child. Children
sadistic
are innocent.
Child, imp.
Yeah. Children have an innocence about them. They're not maliciously vile and evil. Larry Wright couldn't believe that people were fighting to stay, that were knocking each other off to stay in that hell.
Not to be offloaded.
It was incomprehensible to him. All right, should we get back to Ramana's story?
Why not? Let's do that.
We got into some good stuff.
The meanders,
The meanders, the tributaries. So she's hauled into a room and there are 8 other people. This is not privacy of one-on-one with a counselor or ethics officer. There are 8 people around. And can you read, please?
When your stats are down, nothing is private. The subject of sexual aberrations is very fascinating to Scientology auditors, the supposed counselors, when you're not producing as much as you're supposed to be producing. So when you're not working, getting high enough statistics in your job. So when you get investigated, you get put on the meter, the lie detector, and any kind of sexual activity will be brought up. And do you want me to read out the next bit?
I want you to read the paragraph starting with "she said." Now,
I'm going to have to use the F
read the
word.
paragraph. I want Pilar Saldarriaga's name mentioned in this. This is one of the wild, vicious, evil women who has a high position on Free Winds. Read the next paragraph.
Ramana says when she was brought into the room with 6 SEALG members, the first thing said to her was by her superior, the commanding officer of the Commodore's messenger organization, a woman named Pilar. She said, "You little fucking bitch." She proceeded to tell me that her husband was found to be masturbating and that he was touching me, but I wasn't touching him back. So she'd found a husband playing with himself and she didn't touch him back, and that I was forcing him to masturbate because I wasn't doing it for him, that I was evil. And how could I do that to him? Her husband was also in the room, she says. He was just numb. We didn't talk about it between ourselves. Pilar assigned me to lower conditions, the ethics conditions, and she sent me on my way. I can't remember if I was sent to the engine room, but I think I was. So on some occasions, she was sent to the engine room, this punishment of, you know, being in the filthy, sweaty place where you're by the engines, which will be, you know, noisy and horrible. Yeah, and so she says that she was assigned the condition of treason. You have these bizarre ethics conditions in Scientology.
So Ramana went to the Daily Mail, and we're going to put the link there.
Yeah.
And Ramana talks about how she would get 12-hour, 14-hour scraping metal in a dark, no daylight engine room where girls would go unconscious.
Yeah.
Here's the hypocrisy of Scientology, pretending they will get you out of trauma. They will solve and dissolve traumatic incidents, but they make the traumatic incidents. Yeah. They give you engrams. They're masters at cruelty. So Ramana had a lot of engine room assignments, and she'd say the celebrities were up there, the wealthy people.
Tom Cruise was dancing all night.
Yeah, they would do scuba diving, and they would eat luxury food. And then further down in the bilges of the ship were Sea Org members with sleep deprivation, not eating, passing out, literally going unconscious, cleaning their own crap in the bilges. This is all in the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail has in-house lawyers where everything goes through legal before they publish. Ooh, I know the layers of lawyers. I'm in good communication.
Yeah, I have some experience with that too.
Yeah. So a decade later, Ramana got wise on how to get out of there. She threatened suicide. She may have really meant it, but
she probably did.
Her life was so gross and so just unlivable. This is what Scientology did. This is a 15-year-old. So 15-year-old. So for the next 10 years, she took all this. And then she simply announced she would kill herself. That's the one thing Scientology doesn't want. People have used this tactic to escape. They will offload you. Ramana's mother is still there being a loyal Sea Org member. Completely cut herself off from her own daughter. Her loyalty is to the guru and the technology and Scientology. So wanted to just discuss the hypocrisy, the mind control of incredible abuse to a youngster who was lured in to sign a billion-year contract and treated with this kind of punishment. But what on earth is Scientology doing? Having a room full of people and berating a girl for not having sexual intercourse with her husband.
With her aged husband.
Yeah. Any comments, John?
Well, where do we begin? The control of sexuality is fundamental to authoritarian cults. You either aren't allowed to do it, and so you can feel guilty for wanting to do it, or you are forced to do it. And that in terms of our freedom, the freedom of our sexual behavior is what could be more important than being able to determine for yourself whether you are going to have an intimate relation with somebody or not. So the difficulty comes when I first left Scientology, and it left me. I kind of went, I don't want to do this anymore. Though I was in the middle of the UK independent movement, so it was a bit confusing for me. But I started trying to get some model where, some metaphor, some way of understanding this. And I started to think about, I was reading a lot about animal behavior. At that time, as a good Scientologist, I wasn't going to be reading any psychology. Since then, I've wised up as to why you're not meant to be reading any psychology, because you might find out what the game is. So I looked at animal behaviors, and I suddenly, the penny dropped that the Scientology procedure with the Sea organization, particularly, and with staff members, is taming and breaking people. It's basically pushing them to the point where they will submit. my very dear friend Steve Hassan says that when he was in the Moonies, the 2 years he was in the Moonies, and he was fairly high up fairly quickly, that he would quite happily, if somebody had given him a gun, he would have gone and shot anybody that Moon had told him to shoot. He would have shot himself. He would have given his own life up. And yet he was, he was in college. He was highly educated. He came from a loving, supportive family, and who were very moderate in their views. But you can create this fanaticism. You can get into the fervor in somebody, so that they will submit. I've recently been revisiting the Chinese re-education program, the thought reform programs, as they've been operating in Xinjiang, with 1 million of the 13 million Uyghur going through these camps. Just unbelievable. And we still buy all of this stuff from China. Oh dear, where are we living? What kind of morality do we actually have? But it's fascinated me. I've just read a book by a professor who's examined the process as it went on. And generally in the West, we think about what remarkable work that Robert J. Lifton or Edgar Schein did, looking at these programs, Margaret Singer. And what they're looking at is the programs as they were applied to people who are considered enemies, class enemies in the Marxist terms. There were other camps where the majority of people were, and this is where the people, Marx and Engels called them the lumpen proletariat, the ragged proletariat. And Marx and Engels had a simple solution for them. And I think many students of communism don't know this. They thought they should be exterminated.
Wow.
Mao had a different view. And the view was that they had been forced into their situation by the class enemies, and so therefore they should be rehabilitated. And looking at the processes that they're taken through, where first of all they're taught that their understanding of the world is wrong. They have a lower consciousness where they need to have a higher consciousness. So when a prostitute says, it's my karma, it's my fate that I have to do this, they say, no, you're one of the people. You shouldn't have to do this. So that's the first stage. The next stage is self-criticism, where you learn to look at the things you've done that are wrong. Scientology is very good at that. And then you learn how to criticize others. And this can be quite dangerous, in fact, just as in Scientology. If you criticize the wrong person, then you're in trouble. In China, of course, it meant you could be executed. Then you have thought struggle. There are only 2 more stages. And thought struggle is where you attack the class enemies. You go after people. This starts to feel so reminiscent of the process that is happening at the top of Scientology. And the final stage is reform through labor. So the Xinjiang camps, we're told, are empty because the people have been through the thought reform process. They've been denied their religion. They've been denied their cultural identity. Their children have been taken from them and forced to learn Chinese, rather than, and their religion taken away from them, on the grounds that they're terrorists, these children. And then we find them put into this situation of reform through labor. So the Xinjiang population are the people making your iPhones. They are the slaves who are making the goods that are coming out of China, which we really should not be approving of or participating in. So, corporations like Apple that manufacture everything there, it's just unbelievable. Scientology these are processes that Mao and the Russians before, they're natural processes. They're ways of rendering a person helpless. If you can keep your head while all around are losing theirs. And so by attacking your privacy, by taking away your private thoughts, the Chinese camps, they get you to sign confessions all the time. So again, this process, Robert J. Lifton called it the cult of confession. Humiliating people publicly, diminishing them, belittling them, making them smaller and smaller, so they become more and more controllable. We talked about this ritual that takes place at Gilman Hot Springs, which you told me about, where whoever has committed the most interesting sexual peccadilloes of the week is put up on stage so that the whole crew can listen to this, and they can be, reduced to nothing. It speaks of a man, I think, with Hubbard, that he was, John McMaster told me that wherever he traveled, John McMaster was the man who Hubbard called the world's first real clear, Scientology clear. John was dubious about that when I interviewed him as to what clear was and what he was. But he said that wherever he traveled, there were little red-headed babies. Mm-hmm. And then I think something catastrophic happened to Hubbard, probably around the time of the mid-60s with the forming of the Sea Organization. I think he became impotent. Mm. And therefore, he talked about sublimating sexuality. It's something he talked about, but he talked about sublimating it into creativity. Mm. But it is much more usual for somebody to sublimate their sexuality into sadism and into humiliating, having power over others. And so I have deep suspicions about David Miscavige's sexual potency. And there is something seriously wrong. As a way of controlling somebody, you control, as Steve Hassan says, their behavior, the information they receive, what they think and are allowed to think, and how they feel, their emotions. And this, as emotional control goes, this is the pits. This is pushing you right down, so that you will do as you're told, so that you will submit to the will of the tyrant, the authoritarian, the bully who's in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. John, the well spoken, very, very well spoken. This is a caution to the world. If you are thinking of letting your daughter or son go in the Sea Organization, you will never be a grandparent. Your child's mind will be so bended that they may be a willing participant in abortion. I mean, some will fight it, but there'll be a percentage who are so much into saving the planet and the absolute nonsense preached that they will sacrifice having family. And don't be like me. Don't be foolish. You let your son or daughter be in the Sea Organization or be recruited or lured in, you will never be a grandparent. That's the lesson you need to take away from this. John, I do want to give Bonnie and you a full, I don't want to just tag it on at the end of this.
Okay. So now everybody, you're going to have to wait till next.
So I have to, exactly. I want to give tremendous acknowledgement to Bonnie, to you, to tell Alan and Overy the whole story, just make it a snazzy thing. So we already know what we're going to do next.
Yeah.
John, it was a lovely thing. I do have to run. You were just brilliant as always. Very, very good stuff. Good stuff. And thank you. Thank you. Please stay with us. Please do a Patreon or send John something. Just if you feel you got something out of it, put in. It doesn't matter the amount. Just give an acknowledgement. All right, everybody. I'm going to sign off and say goodbye. Love you, John.
Love you
Lovely
too.
to be with you once a month.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.